Welcome to the Orthodontic Pearls Podcast, where we share tips and tricks to better your clinic, business, and life. Today, we have our honored guest, Dr. Brad Chvatal, as we discuss strategies to maintain referral relationships, the role of innovation in thriving practices, and the ongoing journey of self-discovery. And now your hosts of the podcast, Drs. Chris Teeters, Brian Anderson, and Andy Sarpadar.
All right, welcome back, Pearls Podcasters. This is your host, Andy Sarpadar here, along with my co-hosts, Dr. Chris Teeters and Brian Anderson. Say hi, guys.
Hey.
Hey, what's up?
All right, good to see you. Good to be back. With us today, we have a very special guest. Some of you may know him from the forums and his webinar on negotiating credit card processing fees. He has multi-location in Oregon, really great, well-run practice. He's also an avid marathoner, great guy all around. We have Dr. Brad Chvatal. Say hi, Brad.
Hi. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me, guys.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Brad. Well, to get
hold on a second. Is that how you pronounce your name? This is something that's always interested me.
Yeah.
We know people for years. We know people for years on Facebook. Like
right.
Andy, I think you called Jacob Coach like 3 weeks ago. I've always said Chvatal, Brad Chvatal, but I guess
Chvatal, we say it. It's Czech, right? And so it's actually got an accent over the first A. It's the guttural sound. You got to clear your throat to really say it. But we say Chvatal, like there's an E between the H and V, but there's not. So,
Brad Chvatal.
I never knew.
Czech.
That's always so interesting. I remember meeting Cliff Capus, and I always thought it was Capus, and he was like, "No, it's Capus." Are you sure it's Capus? Are you sure? Because I'm pretty sure it's actually Capus.
But it's funny, like really. I mean, one of the things you always wonder about is it like are people going to think like, oh, that foreign name? Who am I going to be seeing when I come there? But no, we're as American as they come. Like But Chvatal is the way we say it.
Well, awesome, guys. Well, good. Thanks for clearing that up. Well, I want to jump into our regular segment here, which is the state of the profession. I have some updated numbers from Jake Schweizer over at Gauge. So last time we were talking about a little bit of an ortho recession. A lot of practices were down on the year. This was around the time of MOPC. So we have some good news here. So October actually saw approximately a 6.7% increase in gross production, which has actually leveled us up for the year. So overall, the Gauge practices are about on par with last year to date. So that's some good news. New patients were down, but adult exams are increasing significantly. That was a big portion of the drop off for the first half of the year, but now adults are coming back. What's interesting about this is that the new patients added is a little bit down, but the total number of exams is up, and that's mostly coming from adults. Brackets and wires are increased about 8% compared to last year, which is definitely a trend. Jake is noticing that we're doing less aligners now and more brackets. And this trends pretty well with the fact that less adults are getting treatment currently. So all good news across the board. I know that, my practice is doing a bit better this quarter. I feel like we trend pretty closely to the Gauge data in our office. How are you guys doing? Any changes since last time we spoke? We'll start with you, Chris.
Yeah, I'd say we're up a little bit. Adults are starting to come back in. It was pretty much kids the last year. I think there's uncertainty with the election and what's going to happen with rising prices, and people are putting their kids before their own. But I guess just since the election, adults are maybe saying, okay, now's my time. It could just be coincidental, but we're definitely seeing an uptick in adults.
Good deal. Maybe back to school has something to do with that too. I don't know. What about you, Brian?
So October was our biggest month of the year, which is unusual. Generally, August has historically been our best month of the year. August had been our best month of the year up until October, and October actually surpassed August. So that was something that we haven't seen in previous years.
Even with taking time off to do MOPC, that's pretty cool. Less days and more production.
Maybe that's why. Maybe the key is just to get you out of that office,
me out of there.
Brian? Yeah, you're just standing in your own way.
I think so. All right. Yeah.
What about you, Brad? How are you guys doing this so far?
It's funny. The Northwest, it never seems to track with the nation. We're either, slow to enter recessions and later to come out of them and things. But definitely more adults in our area. But we've been doing well. We've actually having a decent year this year. The last 18 months have actually been pretty good. So.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Last time we also talked a little bit about inflation. And of course, inflation's coming down, but prices are still remaining a little bit high. Brian asked the question, are people increasing their case fees year over year? And I was really curious about that. So I dove into the data on Gauge, And it looks like for about the past 3 years or so, we are seeing an increase in the average case fee of anywhere between 1.5 to 2% per year. So that's good. I know that historically orthodontists have been very averse to raising their fees, but perhaps one bright spot here is that we've broken that negative momentum, so to speak, and now we're maybe not afraid to go up 2%. I mean, that's $100 a case. You do that on all of your cases, and that's a significant chunk that can help combat our higher prices.
Andy, a couple things there quickly. I don't know, do they break out, like if you have a retainer program or anything like that? Is that
not on Gauge? No. I
Yeah.
think probably you could probably dig into it, but this is a lot of self-reported data too, so it doesn't get that myopic with it. But that's what's your theory on that?
I'm just wondering. Well, my theory on that would be that as more and more people adopt those, right, that literally if people are charging $600, $700, $800, whatever, about however much they're charging for a retainer program, as more people get that, the average case fee could actually be the same. But now we're tacking on additional stuff, whether it's more clear braces or add-ons like retainers or things. And so for us, we're closing retainer programs at 90%, and those are at a tack on of almost $600 to $700 a case. It's raising our average case fee 10%. So that easily, if you only had a few more people on Gauge adding that each month, that might account for that difference. That not to say that we're not raising the fees. I'm just curious if they broke out those add-ons. So
it's a great point, and that's the thing about statistics is this is an average. So it could be one guy who's increasing 700, maybe someone else is dropping. So that's a good point there. But Chris, so you added retainer insurance recently.
I did, yeah. I think, and we did not change our case fees, but we saw a significant bump in production by adding that program. And I think that's a huge pearl for everyone listening. If you haven't adopted a retainer program, we do a flat fee of $750, and then if they lose a retainer to replace it, it's $29 an arch instead of $230 an arch. Which over the course, most people are going to lose 3 sets of retainers. So it's kind of like Apple Care. It's statistically a bad bet for the patient, but when they use it, they love it. They absolutely love it. So all insurance is, right? But everyone loves it. Everyone still buys insurance, right? Because when you need it and you have it, and there's always that case of the kid loses 10 retainers, right? Where you lose money on it, but the overwhelming majority you'll never see again. So they have the protection knowing that they have it, but it also is a way to make really everyone happy. It's a total win-win. So definitely instigate something like that if you haven't yet.
We want to thank Large Practice Sales for sponsoring this podcast. Chip Fitchner is the co-founder of Large Practice Sales, the largest advisor to orthodontists seeking to monetize a part of their life's work through a partnership with an invisible dental support organization, or IDSO. Today, there are dozens of qualified IDSOs partnered with growing orthodontic practices across the U.S. at record values. Large Practice Sales has completed over $1 billion of IDSO partnerships in the last 24 months, with over $150 million for doctors in their 30s. For more information, you can log on to www.largepracticesales.com or reach out to Chip Fitchner via email at chip@largepracticesales.com.
So Chris, one of the things I see a lot on the chat boards is people asking, like, oh my gosh, why would you have this? You're never going to sell your practice, right? So, you're going to have this retainer program. It needs to have a defined time. Ours is lifetime because we're like you. We do have a copay on the back end.
Yeah.
And so with that, I say for what we bring in on the retainer program, if somebody buys my practice and they're dumb enough to not continue the retainer program, I'll take the retainer program going forward. I will honor all the ones we have as long as I get to collect all the future fees on a retainer program, in the
Absolutely,
practice. Because we're making those guys in-house, right? We're 3D printing those, and we're at the point now where we can literally make a model and a retainer for under $5 in our practice, right? So
absolutely.
Wow. That's a printed retainer? That's off of an already printed model.
And if we want to get into 3D printing later, we can talk about that too. But with the system we've got, with the resin and the plastics we're using, even including staff time, I would bet we're under $5 to print a model, make the model, have the assistant.
I'd love to learn more about that.
That's fascinating. I've heard it can't be done for less than maybe 19, even the most efficient practices. But that's really impressive, Brad.
We can talk more about that and how to do that and how to get into it if people want to. But let's see where we go.
Yeah, I think we've had a retainer insurance program in place for a few years now, and it's definitely a boost. It's definitely a value add. Not everyone goes for it, but those who do generally are pretty happy with it. And I always encourage it for those patients who just want that peace of mind. You know, a retainer, that's a big fee for a lot of people. And if you can, if you can even do a payment plan or something on these retainer insurances, I think that can work. There's obviously some issues with that, but making it more affordable is what it comes down to, and that peace of mind. Yeah. Do you do a retainer insurance program, Brian?
No, so we've never done that, and we've discussed the idea, and I've talked to some friends and colleagues about how they do theirs, and I've had discussions similar to this. Well, should it be lifetime? Should it not? Should it be a set period of time? What should be a copay, et cetera? And it's mostly just inertia is hard to overcome, honestly.
Sure.
We haven't implemented it. But I do think that where we're at in most of our practices and our culture is convenience. And we like to see options, right? So when you're checking out on any online platform, it seems like you can add all these options. So to me, it makes sense that orthodontists are doing this now. They're giving patients options to do this type of stuff. And patients who think that it's going to make sense and it's going to be a good value, they're going to go for it. Patients that don't, they're not. But I do think that there's opportunity there. But no, we don't do that. We've just raised case fees to be about gone up with inflation, basically. And we had this mark where, okay, well, we haven't gone beyond this mark in like years. I've been a partner in the practice for about 7-8 years. And we had this same line that we haven't really gone beyond for years. And, started thinking about it. Well, gosh, why are we not raising fees just like everybody else? Fees are being raised on me every time I go out to eat and make any kind of a purchase that's what inflation is. So we have to raise our fees and then nobody gets sort of left out. If everyone just raises their fees, as long as employers then are paying more too, right? Then theoretically it shouldn't be a burden on anybody, but it takes some time to catch up.
I don't want to toot my own horn, but I think I figured this thing out. So we're about to have no tax on tips. What if we put out a tip jar and don't increase our fees, or have one of those little, your TC presents a case. This could be part of any software, and just like flip it around a sign, and there's a 35%, suggested tip, and then if you want to be cheap, we could go down as far as 28%, and give them a little stink eye when they press that one, but. Yeah, I think this is...
Or make your case fee $500 and let them put in a $6,000 tip for you.
There you go. There you go.
They can turn around the iPad and say, now this is just going to ask you a few questions. And a tip, 15%, 20%, 25%.
Yeah,
I think we figured it out.
Straight in the eye.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. So, Brian, I think, some things you touched on, though, that I was going to say was I think we do have these emotional barriers that we put, right? Don't cross a certain threshold because we think it's a psychological barrier for a patient, number one. Yeah. Another thing that we've done is we've started, back to the credit card notion, we've started charging to use credit cards in our practice, right? So they can make their down payments with no credit card, with no upcharge for a credit card, but any ongoing payments, or if they want to pay for a retainer with a credit card versus an ACH or a check, we're charging a percentage for that. Now, it varies state by state. There's some good summaries out there of each state what you're allowed to charge, but it's made a big difference, right? So you're looking at on average 2 to 3% of this. So back to that psychological barrier, though. So if the retainer program was $697, well, now it's $721 or whatever it is, because we've just tacked that 3% on, and then if they pay cash, it's backed off, right, back to what the original quoted price was. So that's a change that we've made probably in the last 18 months or so. Two things: one, to increase our case fees. Our average case fee hasn't increased, number one, but we've increased. If people go beyond 6 months beyond treatment time, we're tacking on finance charges, number one, and number two, we're adding on these credit card fees to people.
Brilliant.
But one of the things I think we all need to be aware of is that if our practice, if we're sensing that maybe we're not, kind of converting cases at the level that we want, that's something that might have been in our practice, we're level 1, level 2, level 3. You might go like, it's probably level 3, but I'm just going to call it a level 2 because I'm afraid that I'd lose it if I charged them what I really think it's worth, right? And so my average case, we haven't changed the amount, but what I find myself doing at times is kind of dumbing down what would have been a level 2 to a level 1. And so because of that, it's bringing down a case fee that might have been something. So I think we all need to be aware of that type of stuff, that, gosh, things are kind of tough, inflation, like, yeah, level 3 is a high fee, but let's not call it that, but that's what it is on that double impacted canine case that we're, we should earn our money on,
You raise a good point, though, that there are these psychological barriers. And I think as orthodontists, we're particularly susceptible because I think we often have some codependent traits. Number one, we want to please people. We want to please people. We don't want to cause an issue, right? We want to get along well and have people be happy, number one. And I think that's can be good, of course, but it can be a vulnerability that can be detrimental. And number two, we generally have had healthy margins. So I think a lot of people have thought, well, I don't really have to run this like a business because I've got these margins. And I think we become more successful if we just say, hey, I'm going to run this like a business. I'm not going to get involved emotionally like, oh gosh, I feel bad. I mean, I love being generous when I can. But I found that sometimes that inhibits me because I think, gosh, this kid really needs treatment, or I think they really need treatment, and they've got 4 other kids in treatment and they, don't have a great income, and I kind of feel bad. And I've had to remove myself from that and say, gosh, no, you need to make the diagnosis. What's the diagnosis? Make the diagnosis and make a recommended treatment independent of what you think, is going to be hard for them. And then ultimately they can decide. And that's just letting go of that codependency a little bit. Like, hey, I'm going to say what I think you need. And it's up to you to figure out if you want to do that. And so anyway, in terms of running a business, I think that the more we can standardize our business practices, the better we are. I think it's better for the patient a lot of times too, honestly, because it's more predictable and
for sure.
More efficient.
Good thoughts. Good thoughts. We'd like to discuss a little bit of what's going on the Orthodontic Pearls Forum. If you aren't following us on that yet, make sure that you join the Orthodontic Pearls Forum. This is the largest all orthodontist Facebook forum in the world. So great discussions happening on there. On November 8th, Rainy Booz, I'm gonna butcher this name. Booz, it's RANYBOUS. And I apologize, Rainy, if I said that wrong. But you had a great post there. Rainy says, one of my top referring offices, which is a corporate office, just hired their own orthodontist. They used to refer to us about 5 to 8 new patient exams a week. And do we have any tips on how to maintain the relationship with the general dentist that used to refer and the office staff? Should I acknowledge it openly with the dentist, or just keep sending baskets, referral pads, just move on and target new referral sources? Looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So this got a lot of engagement, and I think that this is something that if we haven't already faced this in our practices, we are going to face this coming up. So I know I have some personal experience with this, but have any of you guys faced a situation similar to this, and what advice would you give to someone in a similar situation?
With pedo, fortunately, we're a little bit removed from that, with my wife being our primary referral source. But I definitely feel that we felt it outside a little bit, where you're always needing to drop off referral pads and try to keep things going. And it seems like you try and you give and you give and you treat all their kids for free and all of that. And then they still, they might send you a case, but it's usually the one that's in 4 years of treatment that nobody else is taking. And that's tough. So I think in our situation, I've learned to just kind of let that go. And I really try to just go for the low hanging fruit. So if you're in an orthopedo practice, I just put pretty much all of my focus on like Google with our patients that we currently have and with my wife, and making it easy for them to refer to us. So again, a kind of a unique situation set up.
I would imagine if your wife's hiring her own orthodontist, you probably got bigger issues at home. Brian, I know what would you say to someone who is dependent on these referrals and then, they just dry up overnight? And that's a big number, 5 to 8 referrals a week. I mean, that's a good referral source.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I can validate the pain, the discomfort, the worry. I mean, I imagine if any of us had something like that happen, we would go into this mode of, oh, shoot, what am I going to do? And start to, feel the fear a little bit and start to internalize that. So I can totally understand, like the visceral response. But I think the visceral response often gets us into trouble and causes us to do things that just really don't make much sense. So personally, I think there's a degree of accepting reality. Like, okay, this happened. I'm definitely going to get fewer referrals. And the sooner you can get to acceptance of that, the sooner you can start solving the problem. Because the longer you're ruminating about this problem and it's not fair and it's not right, and I've done all their kids' braces and I've been so good to them, and how could they do this to me? That's totally normal, but you gotta, as a human being, I've been there many times over many different things. I've learned that you gotta get out of that place as soon as you can, allow it to, process it, go through it, sure, but the sooner you can get to acceptance of reality, the better. So, okay, you're gonna lose referral sources, period. Okay, all right. Number 2, Brene Brown said something like, being direct is kind. Beating around the bush is not kind. And in our culture, in our society, we often think, kind of skirting it is the kind thing to, well, no, it's actually not. That ends up being passive aggressive. That's not kind.
Have you seen the book called Crucial Conversations? It's along the same line. It's like,
I was going to say radical candor as well.
Exactly. I think all of those, right? I think you're right. And I think it's a gift to someone to go have an honest, open conversation, and it clears the air.
Yeah.
And I don't want to cut you off. I remember Roger Levin early on in my career. I used him, and he talked about these people. Like, if you have both if someone's that giant part of your practice, you always need to kind of be thinking about that, buffering and protecting yourself. So if anyone out there listening has a big portion of their practice, know that this could happen tomorrow, and what's your game plan? Enjoy it while it's there, right? But then if it goes away, what's your game plan? I think number 2 was, if this person was a personal friend of yours and they're no longer referring to you, you have to decide, is this person a friend or are they a referral source, and get over that too, right? And decide where that relationship is. And so
those are really, really good points. What I would do is try to accept that you're going to lose the referrals and process that. And then I would have a conversation, but it wouldn't be a conversation with expectations, because our happiness in life is so dependent on our expectations being met. So I would try to have my expectation be, I want to have a conversation, and I'll accept whatever happens from that. And probably what I would do is say, hey, I know you brought in ortho. I can understand why. I just want to let you know that I'm always here if you need me. And I understand why you did that. And try and be, take it like from their point of view, try and be, quote unquote, generous. It's really not generous. It's just living in reality.
Brian, it's maintain the relationship, right? Like, even if, again, it is what it is. And at that point, you don't want to be avoiding them when you cross paths in the parking lot, right? I mean, it just, it's, I think it clears the air. And I don't know if you have more to say there. I think in my town, we haven't had that happen yet. So, but I've got a similar situation that.
I'll wrap it up. How I wanted to end that is just that you never know what's going to happen. And so you want to treat what's in front of you with respect, with dignity, live in your values, and not have it be dependent on an outcome, because you can't control outcomes. You can only control what are you doing right now. And if you're saying, hey, well, I'm putting my best foot forward right now, who knows? There's a chance maybe that person, and maybe they decide to take the ortho out. Maybe it is a hassle. Maybe it's a mess. Maybe it ruins another part of practice. And they say, gosh, this person was reasonable. They were friendly. I mean, you're not kissing ass, but you're just being you. And I think, but even if it never happens, but then that's again the part about expectations. If we go into it thinking, you know what, I'm going to be really generous. I'm going to show them that I'm above the fray. I can do this. And I'm really inside, I'm expecting that they'll keep referring, and they don't, and we're disappointed. Well, it's an ego trip on our end. So I think you just have to just go in there saying, this is how I think this is the best way to approach it, independent of whatever happens. And you know what? I think when we do that, more often than not, whatever happens ends up being good, whether maybe they're going to refer back to us, or maybe we just have, like Brad said, a decent relationship. And maybe that's a great outcome. It's not the money outcome that we wanted, but it's about much more than money. All this stuff is.
Yeah.
And things could happen with that orthodontist. You never know what will happen in the future. They could we've seen that where they bring in their own orthodontist and things don't work out and they split ways. And if you were good to that person, who's the first person they're going to think about working with again? It's going to be you. So you definitely don't want to take an adversarial approach, but be supportive however you can.
Absolutely. Brad, you had something to add to that?
Yeah. Well, just on finishing up that note, I think sometimes, what you got isn't what you hoped for, but there might be some difference in that. Now it freed up time in your schedule that something else happened and you build another. Who knows? I think you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And I think back to Brian's point, which is this acceptance of it. is a peaceful place to be. And while it stinks, but it's like, I think we all are the type of people who are going to go get it and try and figure stuff out. And as Brian said, the faster we can get to that point, which is, hey, what's next? What am I going to do? To answer the person's, question, like, what if this happens? So in our town, we have a big GP practice that does a ton of Invisalign, and it used to just eat me up. And they have an Invisalign day and do all these things. And for me, I'm just like, you know what? The owner's a friend of mine, and you know what? There's enough business to go around, and we're still friends, and it's okay. And I know that they do it, and we even joke about it. And his marketing person's even dropped stuff off. And, she told me about how their Invisalign day is one of their biggest days of the year to do Invisalign. And I'm like, so be it. It's raising awareness, because there are people. It's like, I think it's much like, but I think the thing about it, though, is it raises awareness, much like Smile Direct did or whatever, right? If they're telling all of their patients, there's going to be that portion that says, I want to go to the specialist. I'm a specialist person. That's where I'm going to go to. I'm not going to have my GP do it. So we do garner those patients. So they might bring an in-house ortho in someday. And I think you're absolutely right. And the same thing, Chris, which is that might not work out. It might not be what they expect. And that ortho, what happens when they leave in 18 months and these cases are in disarray? And, if you haven't had that relationship like Brian talked about, or had that conversation, like, well, I can't go back and tell Chris that I need his help now to bail me out, because I sheepishly went and got this orthodontist and we haven't talked in a year and a half. Right. And now I've got to go with my tail between his legs and I'm going to go talk to the other guy down the street instead. Right.
I'll tell you guys this, I'm probably in a different situation than all of you. I guess we're all in unique situations, but I practice with my wife, and we have 2 locations in very different demographics and a very different set of referral sources as well. In our town, actually, there's not a single pediatric dentist who does not have their own orthodontist. So we've seen this happen. Like, I've been on the brunt of this many times. You can count on one hand the number of GPs who are not doing Invisalign, as long as that hand has no fingers, every single one of them. And in my wife's practice, she has a little bit more pedo referrals, but she's also a little more dependent on 1 or 2 referral sources there. So we have had that experience, and we've been on both sides of it. So we lost one of our biggest referral sources when they brought ortho inside. And when I heard that, I just remember my heart sank, like, what are we going to do? Like, do we just like close up shop and move on? Because we can't even be profitable without that. It was also early into the startup phase. I should mention that. So that was especially a devastating blow. But, we just hit the pavement. We tried to get everything we could. We made friends with all of their associates. We just kept marketing, because what we noticed is that, there are some patients who are not going to want to have only 1 day a week, or 1 day a month, with their orthodontist. They need more availability. Some of them like our office better. There's all those reasons. And it's not a lot, but we did get a trickling here and there, enough to keep it going. And, lo and behold, a couple of years go by, and I get approached by this dentist, and he's done with ortho. He hated it. He always hated it. He did it just because he kind of had to. He got roped into it. But now he's like, I just want to be done. I'll sell you the charts, and we'll pick up right back where we left off. And that's not going to happen every single time, but it did for us. And I'm really glad that we didn't go the other direction with it and burn the bridge. And, we could have. There was a lot of those feelings there. Likewise, I've been on the other receiving end of it, where a big office was referring exclusively to a competitor, but then they brought not everything, but they brought some of it in-house. Competitor talked some trash about him to the local community, and he cut him off entirely. And then because I looked at this and I'm like, these guys are best friends. I'm never going to get anywhere with them. I can't even get past the front desk. But, we kept at it, and just not aggressively, but we were just always there, and we share mutual patients. And I always believe our mutual patients are our best referral source. So if they are going back to their dentist, even if that dentist doesn't know us, maybe even doesn't like us, but they can't deny that the patients are happy and that the work is good. By the time that he had a falling out with his friend, he was like, I already know Dr. Sarpo. I've been curious for a while. Let's just go all in with that. And that became one of our biggest referral sources as well. So it's doing what you can with what you have, setting yourself up, that karma, just regardless of outcomes, just enjoy the process and do it. That's hard when you're down. I'm going to be the first one to admit that. When that happened when we were in our startup years, it was devastating emotionally, and it's not easy to keep your cool, but very beneficial to do so.
Hey, I just wanted to mention something about that. Zooming out and trying to understand our psychology better, trying to understand our behavior better. And this is coming from, the perspective that I find myself falling into these things all the time. So this is not me preaching. It's just that I've learned some of the stuff and I realize, oh my gosh, I fall into these traps, these mindset traps all the time. I think we have a tendency to have dualistic thinking, meaning we want to categorize it as this or that. It's good or bad. They're a refer, they're a non-refer, because it's more simple. Mm-hmm. Our minds love to conserve energy. And if we can label something as this or that, we don't have to think about it anymore. And it's somewhat unsettling saying it's neither this nor that. It's both. It's in between. That's, the cross that we have to bear, so to speak. That's hard to do and it's not satisfying. But I think in a sense, we're doing that when we say, maybe they're a refer, maybe they're not. I don't know, but I'm just going to accept that they could be and they could never be. And I'm going to treat them in a way that is just in that space. And I think because if we write them off, well, they're never going to refer again. You turn your back, you burn bridges. Yeah. You just label them as a non-refer. Or if they're a refer, well, they're a refer. How could they do this? How could they betray me? They're just running a business like you are. Right. And I find myself, I have to step out of these mindsets. Like, okay, no, don't go there.
I certainly like the idea of kindness. I think one of the things I've been through in my career is I've ridden these roller coasters of like, hey, I'm not going to worry about the GPs and the referral sources. I'm going direct to consumer, right? Yeah. Increase the Google ads, billboards, and F them all, right? I'm just going to do it. And then back to no, I'm going to really focus on just, hitting those referral sources. Because if they refer me a few a week, that's way better than me trying to get new people every month. Yeah. And I've kind of settled on that. So I think just back to, I'd love to hear your guys' point, but just circling back to the Facebook questions, do I keep bringing them gift baskets, right? Yeah. I think for me, it's, I want to work with people who like me, right? I think it's, and so for us, we have some deliveries that are like, we just took out Costco pumpkin pies and we hit 50 offices with that, right? Yeah. But for Christmas, we're only going to hit 5 or 6 offices. Because to me, that's hey, your family, and I want to thank you, and I love you guys, right? So they're kind of two different things. One's marketing and or advertising rather, and the other one is this core value, like, hey, you respect us, we refer back and forth to you guys, and we're going to show you the love now, right? So I think in terms of that, for me, I'd probably scale back the baskets and let, I'd have that conversation. I'd still treat them with the Costco pie delivery, but I wouldn't be bringing them a big giant Christmas basket. I think that to answer that question on what would I personally do. And so I think it's like, hey, we've only got a certain amount of marketing dollars. Let's put them towards the, the most fertile ground, if you will.
We want to thank Large Practice Sales for sponsoring this podcast. Chip Fitchner is the co-founder of Large Practice Sales, the largest advisor to orthodontists seeking to monetize a part of their life's work through a partnership with an invisible dental support organization, or IDSO. Today, there are dozens of qualified IDSOs partnered with growing orthodontic practices across the U.S. at record values. Large Practice Sales has completed over $1 billion of IDSO partnerships in the last 24 months, with over $150 million for doctors in their 30s. For more information, you can log on to www.largepracticesales.com or reach out to Chip Fitchner via email at chip@largepracticesales.com.
Well, Brad, I think that's a very pragmatic and well thought out answer there. I think that Brad, one of the things I've always respected about you is that you're always pragmatic. I know you're a fellow student of Stoicism, and you believe in making the right decisions, not the emotional decisions. I'd like to go into a little bit about, you recently sold to an OSO. Okay. And
I did. Yeah.
This is
DSO,
a hot topic. DSO. Okay. DSO. Yeah. The difference again between those two. No, I'm just kidding.
One's just orthodontic. Yeah. There you go. You got to make sure there's a distinction. Yeah.
So, this is something that a lot of people have been struggling with. I think that maybe the temperature's coming down a little bit right now in light of the economy, but it's going to bounce back up, and this is going to be a hot topic for years, I think. you don't make emotional decisions. A lot of people, I think, can be making an emotional decision when it comes to this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with your decision-making process, why you went this way, how you're enjoying it so far? Maybe tell us a little bit about advice for those who are considering one way or the other.
Sure. One of the things that's unique about this is it's hard to get anybody to shoot you straight on this. And I appreciated what Brian said earlier. I want to talk from the heart and talk about what my core values are and where we are. I think one of the things that's made it intriguing for people that have reached out to me about it is I was always a guy who said, never sell, I'll never sell, I'm never going to do it. And so people have been surprised when I'll post something relative to have joining, a group. And so back to the decision process, you're right. I am very pragmatic to the point where I literally kicked the tires for 18 months, literally kept coming back and massaging it and talking about it. And a couple of things with that was it just had to feel right because I knew it was one of the biggest decisions of my life outside of marriage and having kids to do this. And so it kind of came to the point where I worked the deal so hard that they came back with the deal that I negotiated. And I felt like it was free agency for me. Like, this is it, right? Like, I've got this last career opportunity, which team am I going with and am I going to do it? And when they came back with a contract that was an offer that was everything I asked for, I was like, well, now I either have to tell them no, and it's going to burn that bridge completely because they, did it, or I have to do it. And so I really tried to live my life. I know we've talked about this stoicism and with no regrets, but my wife and I joke that we have all our bases covered because I worry about my past decisions, and she worries about the future. So we've got it all covered. And so I know that regret for me has historically been a big emotion, right? And so I wanted to make sure it was the right decision. So we all had those instructors in ortho school. So a big decision for me was those guys who were like the 75-year-old instructor who, was still doing it and still loved ortho. And I still believe to this day we've got the best profession. But I know myself well enough that I'm a momentum guy, that if I would have stayed in my practice in the current state it was and not sold, I would have been there at 75 in the same building, doing the same thing. And I knew there was something else. And I didn't know what that something else was or what it was going to be, but I knew there was going to be a second half. And back to our talk, I know you and I have talked a lot about The Road Less Stupid in that book and what it means to me, but he talks in there, the chapter about we're playing, what are you going to do in the second half, right? Whatever you did in the first half is all well and good, but the second half is, where you win the game or lose the game. And I think for me, and the other book was Falling Upward by Richard Rohr, which is, this notion of we spend this whole first half of our life accumulating and playing by all the rules. And then the second half is what's the meaning of all that stuff? I'm good at what I do. I love what I do, and I don't want to get out of it, but I also want to do something different. And so part of that decision of joining the DSO was to force my hand a bit, because when I get down to the point where now I own 20% of the business, it's a lot less interesting to me than when I owned 100% of the business. Right? And so that was probably the number one biggest driving factor, number one. Number two, at the time, so I think one of the decisions, if someone's making that decision, it's like, hey, I kind of know that this is getting towards the end for me, right? Like I know that I'm nearing where I might be considering wanting to do something different or be out of orthodontics is one reason I think that would be a really valuable reason to choose a group. I think then number two for me was the getting, kicking the tires on all this stuff. My practice had grown tremendously, like many of ours did through COVID, right? And most of you guys are probably not, old enough to remember the Beanie Baby craze when you could, buy the Beanie Baby for $10 and sell it for $3,000.
Of course, I remember Beanie Babies. Okay. Yeah.
So there was part of me that was like, hey, like my practice has grown, like it's at this kind of peak level, and multiples had come up, in terms of what they were offering practices. And so it's like, hey, I've grown this thing. Why don't I take some chips off the table? Because I've also made it to this size where I don't think it's going to need a long runway for someone else to take this over, right? Like the size that it is, it's going to be too big for one person. So either I'm going to need to stay on board, or a group's going to need to be in there to help make that happen. And so it was partly the size of the practice that it had grown to, and the fact that it had grown financially, that it was like, and the multiples were at this good spot, which is like, hey, why don't I take some chips off the table? You alluded to the building that I did. So the building that I had as well, I literally simultaneously within 3 days, I sold the building to a private equity group, and I sold my practice to a private equity group, and closed those on a Friday and a Monday. Yeah. So with that, I remember I was on the way to the AAO, and literally signing this contract because it needed to be done by Friday to put the money in the bank and all this stuff. And I remember I was traveling to the I was in the Denver airport when I signed the document. And I just remembered the sigh of relief of going like, you know what, if I, for whatever reason, don't make it home from this trip, my wife has nothing to worry about. The practice is no longer her problem, right? So there was this weird peace of mind that came like when I paid off my student loan debt, which I didn't think was going to be an emotional thing for me because I didn't have that much student loan. But there was this emotional thing of like, hey, that's no longer my wife's problem, right? It's financially, she's set. She doesn't have to worry that I don't show up to that practice on Monday. It's not her issue. Now, with all that being said, yeah, certainly the amount in the bank account was nice. I think, you can run all the calculators that guys have put out there and, you can put the different scenarios. And I think if you're going to work more than 3 or 4 years, especially from an orthodontic side, it's about a wash to join a group or not if you're going to work 3 to 4 years. And anything beyond that, it kind of goes in their favor. And that's not accounting for pie in the sky, recaps and all those things. And so real quick, just on the MB2 recap, I've gotten lots of congratulations for people. And I rolled all my stuff back in the company stock. I'm still, going to, I'm rolling the dice just because where I am financially, I didn't need the cash at this point to take anything off the table, but we were able to take off, 23% of the cash off the table if you wanted to. And I know several of my friends did that, but my financial planner was like, hey, if you don't need the cash, like these venture capital guys, they win 4 times out of 5, right? Like their investments make good. And so it was like, okay, let's roll the dice and see where this goes. Right. And so we'll see. Right. And so with that being said, I think for me, a lot of people come to me and that I've talked to, and the reasons that they want to join is that they think that there's going to be this big release of burden, right? In the practice, there's going to be, better healthcare plans, or there's going to be a better 401k plan, or there's going to be, they're going to help you with staffing issues and payroll issues and all of those things. And what I like to tell people is absolutely, I really work hard to have a well-run practice like you guys do, but there's nothing that improved post DSO except maybe my Invisalign pricing after I joined than before. I still have to coach my staff. I still have to, so I think this notion of, and I've, talked to many people that you've got to have the right reasons to join. And I don't think that taking administrative burden off of your plate is one of them. And I think they want us to believe that that's the case. And I don't know what your case has been, Brian.
I agree with that. I agree 100% with that.
So Brad, you're with MB2, and then Brian, you're SDB, correct?
MB2, yeah.
Yeah, specialty dental brands, yeah.
Here's what I will tell you about MB2. There's absolutely, they didn't change any terms of my contract in that 18-month period. They didn't change the offer. They didn't change any terms of the agreement. They didn't change a thing, right? And they were honest as the day is long and had still continued to do that. There's nothing, they didn't come in and change our software after the fact. And one of the best things I like about it is I'll go to a GP and I'll bring up like, oh, I sold part to a group, and they'll be like, really? And it's been, I don't know, 19 months now. And I said, isn't that awesome? Like, you don't even know that I've done it. So there's no outward signs whatsoever that that's happened. Now, my health insurance was better. We had just joined a group plan literally like 6 months before we joined with MB2. And my healthcare is no better now than it was then. My 401k doesn't have a match, and it did before. And as you and I have talked ad nauseum, Andy, I run my practice tight, and I'm the guy who's going to go out and try and find the best 401k plan and the best health insurance and, try to do all those things. And I love the administrative side. Like literally, I think if I didn't put on another set of braces, I'd be fine. But literally, I would miss my team. I would miss inspiring people and coaching people. And I think back to Seth Godin, who says that the smallest viable audience. And I feel like my employees are those people, right? That I have that influence. And I'd love to hear your guys' questions. I want to be as open and as transparent as I can in this and help people that might be thinking about this or making these decisions.
I'd like to just ask Brian briefly, and then maybe we can get into Q&A, because Brian, you have some experience here too. Now you have 2 locations. One of them I think was pedo and ortho, and then one just ortho.
One just pedo and one just ortho.
Oh, one is just pedo and one is just ortho. Just pedo, one ortho. So you sold the ortho segment, correct?
Pedo and ortho, and I've got a separate ortho thing it's a little bit convoluted.
Hey, why don't you explain your convoluted mess of a career there?
Yeah, so I have a separate pedo practice that I added to this SDB, and then a partnership ortho practice in SDB, and I'm with a group practice that's not affiliated with either one of those and that does orthodontics.
Do you do anything simple, Brian, or is it just all just?
You know,
that says enough.
I'm learning to simplify in my 40s, man. I'm learning that, you know, these lessons sometimes take a long time to learn. But, you know, as I was listening to Brad, I thought more about, again, expectations determining our happiness and being able to be dualistic or non-dualistic in our thinking. Because I think that if we have these expectations, okay, I'm going to join, it's going to go this way, and then a recap's going to happen like this, and then blah, 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 boom. No, you have to be okay with it the way it is right now. Mm-hmm. And that's how I joined. Okay, if a recap happens, that'll be awesome. Will I be okay if a recap doesn't happen? Yes, I'll be okay.
Totally agree,
And to Brad's point about regret, I think, Brad, I think you're really smart to know yourself. Because Andy, you had said, hey, you know, Brad, you don't make emotional decisions. And then as I'm listening to Brad, he's talking about it felt right. He's talking about his emotions of regret. And I think we think sometimes, well, we're logical. No, we're not. We're emotional creatures that use logic. And you made a logical choice knowing what affects you. Well, regret affects me. So therefore, I'm going to do this to mitigate the risk of having that be something that comes back and bites me in the ass, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think going into it, it's like I had to say, what do I want to happen? Well, I want this to happen, that to happen, the other to happen. But am I okay with the deal as it is if nothing happens? Yes. Mm-hmm. I think too often we tell ourselves we want to make the right decision. We don't know what the right decision is for almost anything in our lives. Everything's a roll of the dice. And I think what makes something quote unquote right, again, non-dualistic. There's no right or wrong for a lot of the stuff. So what's right? What's right is you do what Brad did. You know yourself, you consider all the options, you don't let fear drive you, and you also don't let this expectation
FOMO
of pie in the sky. Yeah, FOMO. You don't let those things drive you. You weigh them, you acknowledge that they're there, they impact you, and then at the end of the day, you make a conscious decision that you feel good about. That's a measured, conscious decision. And when you make that decision, you let things play out the way they play out. And you can't go back and say, well, I made the wrong decision. No, you didn't. You made the right decision because based on the available knowledge, you were conscious and you made a calculated, logical decision.
Real quick, Brian, what I'm worried about or concerned about, I agree with 100% with what you just said. There are many groups out there that are on the tail end of struggling that are probably going to fail soon, right? And I think that they're either going to get bought up or dissolve or whatever is going to happen. But they are still giving misinformation and pie in the sky information to people out there. And so, and they're offering these higher multiples because they need to show EBITDA growth. So their internal practices are not growing. So they need to be out there buying, and they're paying too much for practices with these promises or more stock options, knowing full well that this is the end of the ride. Right. And so I agree with everything you're saying, but that's well and good as long as this isn't some Ponzi scheme that you're joining, right? That it's well and good that what you got today is represented correctly, right? And I think I've been in a bad real estate deal where I lost a lot of money. That was a Ponzi scheme, right? And so I think that's happening in this thing to take the emotion out. You think you're making this logical or positive emotional decision that sits right with you, only to find on the back end that what you got wasn't what you were sold. And I think that for me is where if we can help one person not feel that regret, that's where you and I or anybody else who's in one of these groups can be helpful. If you know that your practice, if you know that your group is dying, do not lead someone to slaughter. Like don't do that, right?
But that can be a real conflict of interest there, Brad. I find that my position, I'm not pro or anti OSO. I've been approached by a couple. We haven't sold. I don't have any intention of selling anytime soon. But I said on the forums, I'm not an absolutist, except to say that I'm not an absolutist. So right. So again, there's my ENTP. I think some of us can relate. Yeah, exactly. Extreme moderate. Yeah. So, I'm not closing the door, but I'm also not like kicking it down to get out either. Having said that, I think that it's important that we make these decisions, maybe logically is not the correct word, but rationally, with our goals, with our values in mind. Those values are largely emotional, but then getting to them requires a strategic pathway that controls for emotion, controls for distraction. Chris, again, I'm going to come back to Morgan Housel. I know Chris is a fan of his too. And Chris and I have this debate about paying off student loans or paying off debt. I'm of the mindset, I'm comfortable with debt. I love it, especially leverage debt with the interest rates that the way they have been. I took out as much as I could over the past 10 years at very low rates, invested the difference. If I could afford to pay it off, I'm putting that into, an investment instead. Now that interest rates have risen, I'm cutting back a lot, but I can do that because I have so many reserves in assets that are building interest that I can just take it out of there instead of paying a 7 or 8% interest rate. That's my strategy. I mean, I think it's a logical one, but I don't have that emotional aversion to debt. And Chris, I think you have a little different set of values there. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I do. I think a lot of it has to do with our upbringing. Like we were talking about that time, my parents, I saw them work like dogs for 30, 40 years, dual income home, and they put everything into this beautiful home in Las Vegas. And then they filed for bankruptcy in 2008 when everything flipped because they would always refi in the wrong direction. And the decisions were not made well. And I saw the devastation that happened. So I wanted to be unsinkable. And for me, Morgan Housel talks about this. He paid off his mortgage. He said it was a stupid, intelligent decision from just a thinking perspective, but the emotional weight of I fully own my house was worth it. It was worth paying for that emotional reward. And so I did the same. We paid off our first house. So I'm thinking about paying off the second house, which is like at 2.6%. Probably stupid. You should talk me off the ledge, but I just know that the day I pay it off,
you should definitely not do that.
But there's just something about the idea
mortgage interest is deductible too, dude. Oh, anyway.
Know thyself, though. Know thyself. I think that's the theme.
Yeah,
that's the theme that's emerging here.
I got to set up goals. I got to set up a goal like, hey, I want to knock this out, and I do it, and then I move to the next thing. And that's my emotion that keeps the ball rolling. So it's more of, I think, a charge and a fuel rather than the percentage is off, and I could definitely have a more strategic approach. And I know I'm unique in that, but that's just been my take on it.
This is my point in all of this, is that you have to, there does have to be that emotional drive. We are emotionally driven people, and Mark Manson talks about this. If our brain is a car driving down the highway, mine is in the driver's seat and our emotional self is in the passenger seat. And the way we think about how we make decisions and interact with the world is that, brain is sitting there driving pretty rational. Yeah, we're going to stay on track. We're going to get there on time, take the right exit, all this. And then every now and then emotion just like wakes up, screams, grabs the steering wheel, steers into oncoming traffic. And then logic has to be like kicking back into the passenger seat and then take a hold of the wheel again. But that's a flawed way of thinking about it. The truth of the matter is, it's the emotions who are in the driver's seat, and it's our logical brain who's in the passenger seat. We don't take action based on logic. We take action based on what we want. So the best way to convince ourselves of something is literally to use our logical brain to decide what is in our best interest, and then convince our emotional self to get excited about going in that direction. I think Chris is probably one of the best I know at doing that. Yeah. But, back to this overarching theme is define your values emotionally, define what drives you, what you want out of life, because that's very subjective and very emotional. But then you have to make rational decisions to get there on track. So for your aversion to debt, Chris, which I will try to talk you off the ledge on that, by the way, but like your aversion to debt, that. And a rational plan based on your values would be to pay off that debt as quickly as you can. You have a budget for your personal expenses, and then you put the rest towards your debt. Maybe you pay off your debt first, and then whatever's left over, you can spend. That would be a rational way of meeting that subjective goal. An irrational way of meeting that goal would be like, I want to pay off my debt, but I also really like, cars. And I'm going to buy 5 of these things, or, 14 pairs of underwear. So, Chris, that's another story.
Lululemon, my son said they're amazing. He said, the Lululemon set. He said you have to have 7 pairs because you won't want to go back. So you
see where I'm going with that. That's that balance.
Well, what you want to do is you want to have just one thing. I was going to say on the underwear thing is like, yeah, I have one kind and it's all the same. Same with my socks. Goes back to Amazon, and it's the way that Jeff Bezos runs his practice is like, or his life is that the one less decision you have to make. I have like the same of so many things where I just grab and go, and it's not a conscious decision ever. And it's the best thing ever. I just throw it all and off you go. But now if you want to vary your style, nobody ever sees it. So why do you care? Right. So anyway, that's my pearl is I think the more consistent you can be with things, the better.
Hey, Andy, can I chime in?
Yeah, Brad.
I love that. Yeah. Back to this. I love what you're saying, right? I think what doesn't happen relative to the OSO, DSO discussion for people is that they don't sit down and say, what are the values that they're trying to hit by joining or selling or whatever they're doing. And I think back to that, and I think sit down and define your life's goals, and whether your family goals or personal goals. And that's going to be different for everyone. But I think the emotion carries over, which is, well, I should just do this because my practice is in disarray or whatever, right? I mean, but if it's a financial goal, like, hey, well, let's step back for 12 months and let's tighten your practice down and make sure it's running well so that you sell it. Let's go wash the car and vacuum it out before we put it up for sale, right? And I think defining what values that we're looking at, and so few people I see on so many chat boards, what should I do? This practice is for sale down the street, or should I buy this? Should I go to a bigger spot? And my first question is like, what are you hoping to achieve by that decision? Right?
Yes.
I think for Chris to say, I'm hoping to bring peace in my life and I don't have a bill that I have to do. Like I said about my student loans, and Chris, you shouldn't pay off that mortgage. It's your hedge against inflation, right? At 2.6%. You're making 8% on that right now, right? So don't pay that off. Let's talk offline afterwards. But on my student loan debt, it was number one, a super low amount because I had a military Army scholarship for dental school. I had an academic scholarship for undergrad, and I dental school, the GI Bill paid for, or ortho school, right? So I had very little debt, but I had it set on, $200 a month for 30 years. And I was sitting there one day during COVID and I had $13,000 left. And I'm like, I'm just going to write that check. It doesn't make any sense because it's at 2%. Yeah. And you want to know what? I wrote that and I darn near almost had a tear in my, like literally, like there was just something like I never have to think about that again. And worrying that the automatic payment didn't go through and they're going to jack my rate up to the current rate of 9%. If I missed one payment, there was that emotional part of it that was there, and the financial side wasn't the best financial decision, but the emotional piece. And I think we never or super downplay the emotional part of any decision, whether that's changing software, buying a practice, having another kid. What's the emotional cost of all of those things? And there might be some financial side and it doesn't make sense, but like you said, we're operating with the heart in the driver's seat, and we just need to know and kind of understand what that heart wants and be listening to it, right? We need to have listened to it enough to say, I know that my heart will want that or not want that, and make that decision that you can be at peace with. And I think we all want that, right? This peace at the end of the day, that we can live with those different decisions that we make. And absolutely. And it might not be right to someone else, but it's, I think, all good stuff,
Well, that's great, Brad. And I think that's a really good segue, following your heart, but making rational decisions to that end. You have a really interesting backstory to that effect. And like I keep saying that you're a pragmatic guy, but you do have your values well thought out. And I think that's what makes you pragmatic. I didn't say you're a robot. I said that you make decisions in light of your values, and you don't let the wrong emotions distract you from the right emotions. I think that's a pretty good way of saying this. So, we talked about this a little bit in our pre-meeting here, how your background, your childhood has led you to the decision-making processes that you have. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that. And then let's just kind of segue that into how you run your practice, how you run your life, and maybe some very practical tips for our listeners out there in both of those regards: practice, life, clinical, whatever. Let's go into it.
I love it. I'm excited. It's kind of fun to think about. I think doing something like this, if no one's done it, I mean, it's kind of fun because it gets you to start thinking about things in life that are important or what you might want to touch on or chat about. And so one of the things I think for me, back to this living the second part, one of the things my wife said to me not too long ago was, these two kids that are currently in the house have a different dad than the first two kids did. And I'm more present.
You mean
Figuratively.
Is she just like,
Andy.
she's revealing this to you? Oh, figuratively. I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
I was like, that's a hell of a way to break it to you.
One
man.
time I jumped real quick on a segue that the funny there, my wife one time was, I had jumped on my computer. My wife had used it to look up something and she was watching the show Big Love, if you remember that on HBO.
Oh,
and there was a scene in there where they had, I flip open my computer and the search on Google was prenatal. My wife's pregnant at the time, right? With our fourth. There was a prenatal paternity test is the search in the Google search bar.
Oh boy.
And I wake up in the morning because I'm an early riser, right? And I'm there on my computer and I'm still kind of groggy, haven't had my coffee yet. And I'm prenatal paternity test. I'm like, prenatal, before birth. Paternal, that's the dad. She's trying to figure out who the dad is before it's born. And I I couldn't wait for her to get up. I'm like shaking her in the bed, like, hey, I got to talk to you about something. Like, this is she's like, oh my God, like, I can't believe that you were worried about that. No, my show Big Love, they were talking about it. I wanted to see if it was legit or not. So anyway, no, but in all seriousness, I think it's this notion of, I know we talked about what are some things that I do differently, but to these kids, I've been more present. I've been at home more. I'm home earlier after work. I'm, not engaged and engrossed in constantly having my brain running on what's going to be the next thing in the practice and the next great marketing idea. And I've never missed a Halloween or a birthday or kind of a performance or things like that. But there's this notion, this talk of like, hey, being present doesn't just mean being physically there. And that would frustrate the mess out of my wife, that I would be in the house, but I wasn't there, right? My brain was somewhere else and my mind was somewhere else. Yeah. And so really focusing on this awareness and presence of emotionally being somewhere as well as physically being there. And there's another time we were driving home on the freeway and my wife wanted me to stop on the way home from Portland at this shopping center, and I missed the exit. I just was in my own head and just missed the exit. Of course, the next exit's 15 minutes down the road. We're not going to turn back. And she was super frustrated. And she just said something to me about, you're so self-absorbed, right? And this was years ago. And I literally just hit me like a ton of bricks because I didn't want to be that person. And I literally wrote it down and I put it in my wallet next to my daughter's picture inside my wallet, like the things that were important to me that I didn't want to be that guy. Right. Yeah. And so it wasn't like I woke up the next day and wasn't, but it was over time. I think Brian's saying it's this work in progress in who we are. And I think we can all just keep trying to grow and be the better people that we are and being more self-aware and to those around us. And how does that fit in? And so I think, with that, the things that I've changed is I love coming to work now. Before, it was this whole notion, I think that's changed in my practice life, this whole notion of crush the competition, lead to win, regional dominance, like all this stuff just to me is like, really? Like, how about we just go enjoy our day and love the people around us and love our patients and love what we do and just be thankful that we get to go to work and not have to go to work. And anyway, I think that has been a big change for me of this notion of really this acceptance and just trying to be the brightest light to anyone around us. Richard Rohr uses this example of we all have this light inside of us. And imagine that we're a lantern and we're all covered in tar in different places. And some of us are covered more in tar, almost all the way that maybe there's this little glimmer that shines through in your life, but other people that are this big shiny beacon coming out. But we all have this tar in different spots, right? Where we've got these that blocks the light from coming out that we can be to other people. And I think that for me is this amount of this significance and this purpose that I'm talking about, which is like, how can I be significant to people? And honestly, like hearing what your guys' podcast was about, it was an honor to be here because that's where I am on my journey. And
why don't we stick with that theme a little bit? So one of the things we were talking about before is, you mentioned your spiritual journey. We had Brace's guy, Dr. Grant Collins, on last time, and he has a very unique journey too. I know you guys have had some overlap there. You mentioned to me how he got you turned on to Enneagram. You're also a 3, surprise, surprise. I'm pretty sure I'm the only non-3 in this group. So a 3, of course, is the achiever, and they're defined by their accomplishments. So in a nutshell, what a 3 is they they're typically very high functioning, high achieving, but they tend to over identify with their accomplishments and start to lose touch a little bit with their own personal values, with what they really, their own personal self. So much so that if you ask a 3, what do you really think about this? Or what is important to you? It's like, well, I got the A, it's like my practice is huge. We're regionally dominant. I'm a TikTok influencer. I have a $5 million practice, defined by your accomplishments, and then lose touch with that essence of who you are. So perhaps we could use that as a jumping off point to explore your own spiritual journey.
Literally, I had met with Grant back in January. My daughter was doing some stuff at Mayo Clinic out there in Rochester. So we had an opportunity to have coffee, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be able to be a good friend to Grant. And just, I'm looking forward to just, I know he's had talked about Enneagram before, but we had met 2 years prior at just a group of us guys had gotten together on a weekend retreat in of all places, Arizona, out in Phoenix. But he had brought up the Enneagram, and, we kind of looked at it quickly, but much more like a party trick. And I challenge anyone out there, if you're going to look at the Enneagram, it's not a Myers-Briggs. It's a spiritual kind of definition and diagnosis, if you will, or a labeling to help you find yourself and understand where your shortfalls are and where your strengths are. It's not a party trick to say I'm a 3, so I get this excuse, or here's why I am the way I am. But it's more of a spiritual insight of who you are. And I'd ordered these books that he had recommended on the Enneagram, and I literally ordered from Amazon and opened up the box. I threw it in my closet and didn't think much of it. And I was had gotten to this point in my life where I had read every book that you can think of. Like it was a book, a stack like 4.5 feet tall of management books and life books and everything. And I just was going through them, and so many of them were like this: crush the competition, be your best, do all these things. And I started thumbing through them. I'm like, these serve no purpose for me in my life at this point anymore, right? I just need to take all these to Goodwill. And then I was remembering, I found these Enneagram books, and I'm like, man, Grant said, Brad, well, since you and I are both 3s, blah, 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 blah. And that was like literally the extent of the discussion. And I'm like, man, I need to go pick that up, because if he was that clear that I was a 3, I always thought I was a 3, but if he just knew it and didn't hesitate to say it, I'm like, I got to go read more about this, right? And in reading that book, I kind of put it out. I took all the other books out. I saved about 5 books out of this. It's out of all this huge stack of books. And I'm like, these are going to be meaningful. It's, How to Win Friends and Influence People, the one of the Enneagram books. And then I was reading the stuff about the 3, and it referenced at the end of the book. And it's like, and your next step is to go read Richard Rohr's book, Falling Upward. And I'm like, that then led me on this rabbit hole of self-discovery, which was talking about the 3. Really, the book, it's written about 3s and just literally how this whole first half of the life is achievements and rewards. And I've always labeled myself as a kid a gold star kid. I think partly it was growing up in the 80s. We knew the right answers to when someone asked you, did you wear your rubber bands? We said yes. And, kids these days are like, no, I didn't. And you're like, we knew what to say, at least the kid's honesty. I'm like, God bless you. You said, you told the truth, but could you wear the rubber bands? But I was a gold star kid, right? I didn't care if it was the multiplication tables I knew how to do in 3rd grade. If I redid it 100 times and kept getting hundreds on it, that was enough of the reward. Whereas my kids were like, it's beneath me. I know how to do that. I'm just not going to do it. I'll take an F on it. I'll take a 0 and not turn it in because I already know how to do that. And I'm like, okay, there is a game you got to play here, right? And I was the other extreme, which was, like you said, this achievement stuff. And you're absolutely right. Like this pride in, what size practice did I have, and how many starts, and what was my marathon time? And, I finished college in this many years, all the stuff that was insignificant in the big scope of things in life, right? That if your significant person in your life was in the hospital, that would not matter, right? If you were on your deathbed, none of it would matter whatsoever, right? And so back to this Falling Upward book, and there's just something that Richard Rohr, and if you don't know him, he's a Franciscan monk that is just a spiritual leader that is just lots of good wisdom. He's got a daily
Let me just interject.
Yeah.
Great psychology too, because that's one of my favorite books, and he's one of my favorite teachers, and it's really good psychology. So I think don't just think it was theology, but he does a masterful job of bridging psychology and spirituality. in my opinion.
And not bring, and he's very clear to distinguish religion from spirituality.
Spirituality
right?
is not religion. Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. There's one line in this book that just hit me like a ton of bricks. And it said, there is nothing sadder in this world than an unreformed three. And that's that person who is on their deathbed still talking about that they were the high school football quarterback, right? Like
Uncle
that,
Rico.
And right.
Yeah.
And so exactly. Yeah. The little Napoleon Dynamite. I think I got the doll up here if you guys want to hear some other snippets of Napoleon
I've always
Dynamite.
identified more with Kip personally.
Yeah.
I think it's
For
the
sure.
goatee.
So anyway, I think that for me was then this spiritual journey that led down to, Anthony DeMello is another one, right? And that is an attachment and awareness. And that led to, Eckhart Tolle and to the power of now, right? And I think it just has been, in a way, I don't know that liberating is the right word, but there's this inner peace of all of these things we're talking about all the way back to the guy stopped referring to you and you're like, okay, it's like, there's three things I can do, which is accept it. I can try to change it, or I can move away from it, right? And those are all the three choices we have in anything in our life. And it is so antithetical to who I was. It's like at times my wife is like, I know your power of now stuff. And there was something that she had brought up, and it was just about a relationship where she's like, well, what if this person did this thing to you? Aren't you afraid of that?
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? I'm not. I can't live my life wondering if someone's going to double cross me or do something to me or treat me in a bad way. I'm not going to live that way. And if it happens at the time, we'll deal with it. Like Brian said, we'll cross it when it comes. And I think that's it for me, which is this peace that's come over it, which is like, I can't do anything about it. Like I can't change the future. I can't change the past. I can only work within the confines of today and say, how can I affect those things to the best of my ability, right?
We want to thank Large Practice Sales for sponsoring this podcast. Chip Fitchner is the co-founder of Large Practice Sales, the largest advisor to orthodontists seeking to monetize a part of their life's work through a partnership with an invisible dental support organization, or IDSO. Today, there are dozens of qualified IDSOs partnered with growing orthodontic practices across the U.S. at record values. Large Practice Sales has completed over $1 billion of IDSO partnerships in the last 24 months, with over $150 million for doctors in their 30s. For more information, you can log on to www.largepracticesales.com or reach out to Chip Fitchner via email at chip@largepracticesales.com.
Yeah, absolutely. And you referenced there Eckhart Tolle. Is it Tolle or Tolle? I always get that mixed up.
Yeah,
German guy. I always say he's got the most unique accent that I've heard. You know, I listen to his audiobooks, and you know,
it's soothing. Yeah,
this is a concept that comes up in spirituality, Stoicism for sure, probably Buddhism as well. But this idea that you have something happen and you can either accept it, improve it, or move away from it. And those are really your only three options. And if you can pick one of those, all of those options are rational ways of dealing with it. If we come back to, you know, what are your values, you could make that decision in light of your values, but that's all you have. When you worry about it and ruminate about it and then just don't take any action, just keep it in your mind, in your heart all the time with no action, that's really where we experience a sort of spiritual death. I know that's something that I've worked on a lot. You know, I, like your wife, I think this is the definition of anxiety, is that constant worry about the future. We also talked about Dale Carnegie. I think he mentioned How to Win Friends and Influence People. Well, he also wrote a book called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And a friend of mine, David White, he recommended me to read that book when I was just a couple of years out of residency, and I was really struggling with how much the profession had changed since I had started down the path to go down it. So, you know, when I was making the decision to become an orthodontist, you know, they were saying 3 dentists to replace every 5 that are leaving. We're going to see another like golden age of dentistry. It's never going to be better. And what I didn't recognize is that, you know, this is the observation effect, is that if I'm hearing that message, so is every other person out there with the potential to become a dentist. And so we get this glut. And then, of course, we have the student loan issue, which was blossoming, I think, with my generation. It was still basically a no-brainer. Take out as much debt as you want, because we had never seen anyone not be able to pay off those loans before. Yeah. By the time we all graduated, we had more graduates than ever. People were not retiring. This was also the recession, the Great Recession happened. And I was down on myself. I was like, I put everything I had into this, and now I just have this massive amount of debt. And I don't see a great way of paying this stuff off anytime fast. He recommended that I read that book, and I think that was very enlightening for me. But focus on what you can control. Don't worry about that rumination. When you worry about something that hasn't happened yet, you die twice. I think that's very good advice. Not easy to follow all the time, but very good. Chris, did you have something you wanted to expound upon?
I was just going to say, I would love to segue into that second half of life stuff and talk about fitness. I know you mentioned you're an avid marathoner, Brad, and how that's changed maybe the way and why you do it. Is it helping you to achieve a different state? I know there's that runner's high, or what is it about that journey now that is so huge for you?
So I ran competitively in high school and in college too, as a walk-on at the University of Arizona, but then kind of forayed into marathoning actually while I was in dental school. And for me, I think there's a couple things about it. And it's the competition, just kind of pushing yourselves to a limit and, training. And of course, if you're good at something, it's a lot more fun to do it. The other thing is the people that I've met along the way and other people that have that passion or that drive, whether it's orthodontics or especially marathoning. I've thought about it a lot. And I said, why am I so proud of the marathons I've done and like a marathon PR? And this isn't like a 3 thing of like, oh, look at me, it's what I've done. But there's something about this point where there's a clock. Like you put in all the energy and effort, and at the end, there's no excuses. This is the PR that I got. This is the time that I got in this. And there's no fudging it. It wasn't anybody's perception of how you did. It wasn't any, and I think that in my life where there's so many aspects where, if you, talk to the teacher the right way, maybe they'll give me a better grade on my prep or whatever it was, that it takes all of that out of the equation. It's just this very cut and dried, like, hey, this is a report card of how I did. And because of that, there's this huge emotion, this lead up of, training for 12 or 16 weeks, super hardcore, early mornings in the pouring rain and cold up here in the Northwest in the pitch black doing that. And so I think for me, it's been this thing that is this inner drive. Now, what's changed through the years, like as I've gotten older, it's like that passion's hard to keep up, right? This desire and drive. And so now it's like, most recently, it's like, who can I help? I'm right around that kind of pace where a lot of the cutoffs are for the women's Olympic marathon standard. So it's like, I'm the guy who can go out and help these women.
Is that the category you're competing in, Brad?
I am, yes.
I mean, I know you live in Oregon, and that's probably okay out there.
Yes, I know. Back to back, this helper mentality that I have. I want to help people. So there's this awesome thing to be out, someone trying to hit a goal now to help them do that. And also running now for enjoyment and for fun. And I'm waiting for the competitive bug to come back because I know it's still in there, but I've just been through a couple little aches and pains that I'm getting over, but just to get back so it's enjoyable and fun.
Yeah. Well, I think what's great about it is marathons are you versus you, where I think in practice, it might be, like you said, crush the competition in the first half of life. And now it's like, this is my PR. This is personal record for me, but not for against Andy or Chris for that matter.
Yeah. You're completely correct on that. And I think for me, there is this, if anyone's interested, go look it up. There's a speech, Jeff Johnson, I think is his name. He was a coach for Nike or an employee at Nike. And they have this thing called the Border Clash, where it's the top Washington and Oregon cross-country athletes meet every year, the top high school. And they do it on the Nike campus. And he gave this speech, and it's called the Border Clash speech. Go look it up. And it's, if you're into athletics at all, like it is one that is just so emotional. And it's like, basically, if you have to ask why I run, you'll never understand it. Right. Like if someone has to say, I don't get why you run marathons, but he just says it so poignantly. And it's just this speech that he gave to these athletes of these high schoolers that just resonates. And it's like, again, why people like it. It's like, if you don't get my emotion, you'll never understand it.
I think of my life as like 3 pillars. Yeah. It's the 3 Fs, not what you think, Chris. But I think of it as family, fitness, and finance. There's probably more that I probably should put some time into, but I feel like those are all self-reinforcing. If any one of those pillars is lacking in my life, then the others start to crumble as well. And I personally believe that fitness, it encompasses our exercise routine. I mean, I used to be a big runner. I'm not as big into it anymore. I've had some knee issues, so I do more biking now, cycling, and weights. It's always been such a huge priority of mine. I ascribe to fitness in the same way I ascribe to finances, which is pay yourself first. I'll tell you that, fitness, it's something that you rent, and you can never, it's number one, the ultimate meritocracy. Like you were saying, Brad, you can't BS your way through a score. It's you versus yourself. And that's just the way it is. So there's a certain level of, I don't know if you want to call it pride, but satisfaction certainly in there. But pay yourself first. I remember when I was in dental school, I made it a priority that I was getting at least an hour of exercise. Back then it was running, could be whatever, but I was going to get that done, and everything else would have to find its way around that. I actually had the philosophy that I want to get into orthodontics, and that was a huge goal of mine. But I also realized that, as we said earlier, that outcome's not always within our control. You hear those stories every year about that qualified applicant who just didn't get in. I thought to myself, if that ends up being me, what sacrifice would I resent giving up if I put it on the line to get into ortho and then I didn't get in? And for me, I was willing to sacrifice almost anything except for my physical fitness. And I said, if that means that I'm on the bubble and I don't get in, then I can live with that. But I can't live with giving up my body for 4 years and then also not getting in, and then I have nothing. So I think fitness, again, it's something that's completely within your control as well. It's you versus you.
I think, Andy, it's one of the first thing that goes, right? Like, I think people focus so much on their practice and they're like, hey, it's doing really well. And you can tell they haven't been exercising and haven't been taking care of themselves. And I think it's one of the first things that goes. So that kudos to you to saying that's super important, because I think as we, you can't get that back, right? I mean, some things, maybe you can regain some fitness, but when the back goes, or these other things that you haven't been taking care of through the years. And so, one of the topics we mentioned was what advice would you give to someone? Like, take care of your physical health, right? Do your core exercises, go to the gym, 100%. Do whatever passion that is, walk the dog, something that's going to get you physically active to stay, keep your mind clear, right? And then number two, just to keep physically active. And so I think that's super important. I think that's where it falls short in a lot of people's overall life plan, which is we get so focused on practice and family that goes by the wayside, and realizing we're going to be better all the way across the board if we're doing more.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like from that book Outlive, and I talked about it at MOPC, is like there's four horsemen that will kill 90% of us from cancer, diabetes, and heart disease, and there's only one thing that fights all four, and that's fitness. So it's the one thing we all should be doing to not only live a longer life, but have a better life within those years, and get to 100 and still be able to do, like he calls the centarium decathlon. Do these 12 things when you're 100. That should be the goal, not the biggest muscles or the fastest time, right?
Totally agree. And that's much more where my fitness is now, which is I'm doing a lot more. I have this elliptical bike that I can ride to work, and biking to work, and just trying to stay physically active and fit as the running has kind of gone. I'm not doing as much as I was before, but still, working out and weights.
I'm sorry, did you say an elliptical bike?
Yep, I think I called you one time, didn't I? When I was riding,
you did, but you didn't.
It is. It's like an elliptic. It's called Elliptigo, is what it's called. It's literally like an elliptical machine.
I got a picture of it.
Elliptigo, get one of those.
Sounds pretty awesome. Dude, it's super fun, and it's definitely a head turner if you want to be noticed down the path. So.
Do you think that might be part of the reason why two of your kids have a different dad? Is maybe your wife saw you riding that
might
thing?
Be why. That my wife saw me on that thing, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, that's humiliating." Yeah, it's emasculating and humiliating. So, oh man. I know there are so many other topics we talked about covering. I don't know if there's any other things you guys want to chat about or.
Yeah, we're getting down to the end of it here. I know this has been a great discussion. Brad, I'd like to hear from you. Let's talk about, our theme is pearls. Let's talk about maybe your three biggest practice/life pearls from your experience that you would offer to our listeners. And I think that would be a good thing to close on.
I think number one, delegation. It's been 3 or 4 years now. We've had a leadership team in our practice, right? Which consists of the office manager /financial coordinator, scheduling coordinator, TC, and lead clinician, right? And so these are the people that I make it a lot less daunting to be in a practice. We've got 20 odd employees now with 3 locations, that I have these people that I can go behind closed doors, and those conversations where you're going to talk about goals and you're going to talk about where you're charting the course of the practice and some things you might or might not do, which if you brought up in a staff meeting, like we're going to thinking about switching our software, there'd be a mutiny, even though if you didn't do it. It's this group of people now that it really made me realize that delegation is not the way I used to use it was, hey, I need to mail these 3 things. Could you like put some stamps on it and put it in the mailbox? The delegation now is more charting this vision in this course and having people that can implement that vision, that you tell them the direction that what you vision the end game to be, and having people on there that care as much or more than you do about that vision, and not just a simple like task. So putting together that leadership team or having key people in your office that you can count on to help you do that would be absolutely one of the biggest pearls that I would give to anybody, and that has made it that I like to say I have a no homework practice, right? I don't take anything home. I don't have clin checks at home. I don't go home and, do up employee reviews, and I don't, none of that. Right. So literally, I want to go home and not think about work. Right.
Right.
Awesome.
So that is something that's been huge. And if people could take this thing of delegation, not the tasks that I have, but the vision that I have, how do I delegate that they're more concerned about new patient phone calls and what our production is and did we hit our goals, and I tell them what they are, and I have people that come to me and say, here's where we are on those things, and I don't go home and think about them, right? I'm like, hey, here's ways we could turn on that machine to make it that happen, and be the idea guy and the visionary. Yeah, exactly, Chris. So one of the second things would be, and I know this gets tossed around a lot, but simply be present, right? And that is like, I know that's a big term, and it's not I want to be as specific as I can on that. And that is literally clearly defining, like taking in the moment where we are today and what do you want to accomplish? And that doesn't mean don't have future plans, but hey, if you've got future plans, let's sit down for an hour and think about those and not have them be taking up our mind all the time and never really moving forward on it because we're not doing it. And at the same time, you're there with your kids, but you're really busy processing something else that you're thinking about versus, hey, I'm going to compartmentalize some of those things and not let them just take up my time all the time. I don't know that this falls into a pearl. I think one of the things is back to that being present. It's also being motivational to those people in our lives that a lot of people say, I don't have financial discussions with my team. I'm afraid it's going to bring up conversations I don't want to have, or don't be emotional. I mean, one of my employees, was in the morning huddle and she was in tears, not sure why. And I went to chat with her, and the other team told me that, she and her boyfriend had broken up. And I went to her and I just said, hey, it's going to be okay. And gave her a big hug. I said, I know it hurts like crazy right now. And I said, I know you probably want to run away and go home and sit and do that. I said, but man, be here with us, and let's have everybody here has got your back, and we're going to support you. And like to be that person in these people's lives that maybe don't have someone in their lives that is a steady rock, and somebody that is level-headed, and someone that is on a spiritual journey, or that is financially sound and can give them some direction in their lives. People want to say like, no, that's not me. No, I don't want to be emotionally involved. I don't want to like get wrapped up in that stuff, but I can certainly also be like, hey, I understand you. I get it. I know where you are. I know that's got to be horrible. As a dad of 4 kids, it's easy to do, right? It's easy to say, and with that same notion, I'd say, man, this generation, I have a lot of hope for. I know I've talked to lots of orthodontists that are just frustrated by them. And my practice is run on 20-year-olds. And I would put them up against anybody in the country or in the world. And just this team that we've got, I like to think that's partly because of the leadership and because of the culture. And that's probably the third thing, which is defining that culture, right? Which is, where do you want to work and who do you want to be? And where do you, we have this ability like every day to define where we're going to be and who we're going to be and what kind of place we get to work in. And we get to decide what we're going to accept or put up with or, appreciate or live with. And I think that for me is the biggest thing, is this culture all the way in our personal lives, the culture that we drive. Like, are we going to be the person who people want to be around and are excited by? Or are we going to be the grumpy old man? My wife's threatened me if I get to be the grumpy old man, she's putting me on the curb. So it's like, I gotta, keep doing this. So I think that last part is defining the culture in your life and defining it in your business and than creating that life that you want, right? And by inspiring those people around you and by leading by example in those things. And so I told Chris earlier, I don't know if I ever told you this, Andy, it was a buddy of mine, Jim Stork, who's an orthodontist in Iowa, I'm always throwing out these pearls to people and different things. And like, man, Brad, you have so many different things. Like you need to write these down and, get 100 of them and then, make a book or a podcast. And so I think I wrote down number 99 last night or this morning. So it was, my 100 hacks, and it's all the way how to tie a tie that looks cool, but super simple, and how to tie your shoes that they don't come undone, and, different items to buy. I know Chris and I talked about
when you do an episode on all 100 of those, I want to know.
Dude, it would be a blast. It'd be so much fun. So I love sharing with people. And I think back to this notion of finding your life purpose and wrapping it up with why I joined a DSO was to find what's next. And I think just my goal is to help people. My goal is to do stuff like this to, get the word out and help as many people as I can. I hope that anyone who's reached out to me has felt that I'm willing to give and share in any way that I can, whether it's on credit card rates or 3D printing or any life hacks or spiritual journey stuff. I'm here to help and want to be a sounding board and a resource for anybody.
Throughout this conversation, I've been impressed with a few things. And one is the idea of you don't need to grow everywhere in your life. Like Chris is fine having multiple pairs of the best underwear because he doesn't want to have to spend time thinking. And we laugh about it, but he doesn't want to spend time thinking about something. He doesn't need to grow in that area. He doesn't need to experiment in that area.
I'd like to grow in that area.
Probably grow a little in the
Brian.
Oh my gosh. Okay, of course, Andy. So we have to identify the areas we want to grow in, and in those areas, we want to be at the border of order and chaos, as Jordan Peterson would say, a little bit uncomfortable. And speaking of spirituality, any true spiritual pursuit is going to be a little bit humiliating because you're going to be looking with real, like you don't have goggles on anymore, or you're trying to remove the distortions and see yourself and see life for what it is and see your deficiencies and get to know your deficiencies. And that is a liberating thing, like Brad said. I think that's ultimately a liberating thing. And to not judge it as, well, if I accept that this is a part of me, then that means I'm bad. Well, no, it doesn't mean you're bad. It means that you've learned to cope this way and to acknowledge it. And that's where progress starts happening. Progress always starts by telling the truth. And I think that's important. So you have to tell the truth to yourself. You have to tell the truth about yourself and ultimately, about life and what's happening in life. So I love these discussions. And Brad, I've always thought you're just a really, really solid person. I haven't known you really well, but you just get a sense that you're a good man. And what I would say good is you're looking at yourself and you're not going to be us versus them mentality. And it's been a real pleasure to chat with you. And Andy and Chris, love you guys too. Yeah.
I think we've learned a lot, as always. Really enjoyable conversation. Brad is, of course, on the Orthodontic Pearls forum. So if anyone wants to reach out to him, they can send you a DM, Brad, and just follow. So if you like what you're hearing, we'd really appreciate if you could subscribe to our podcast. And hopefully you found some value here, and that could be the best thank you that you could give to us for the time that we put into it. So again, subscribe, follow, like, all that good stuff. Tell your friends. And with that, I want to thank you guys for being present here. Until the next time. See you later, guys.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Brad.
Bye.
If you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics, you won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics.
Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer. So be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.